Welcome back to another edition of The Worst Fighting Game, my never-ending quest to make your dreams come true. To uncover something that can knock Criticom off its throne of polygonal feces. Over the last few months, I've noticed the name of a particular contender that many of you have been requesting, nay, wishing for me to take on. This is Dragon Ball Z Taiketsu, released in 2003 for the mighty Game Boy Advance, published by Atari Infogrames, and developed by Webfoot Technologies. This not only has the distinction of being a terrible fighting game, but the double stinky distinction of being the worst Dragon Ball game ever made, and that, my friends, is a lofty, lofty claim. But we don't know for sure until we get it in the ring. So good old Webfoot, huh? The story goes that Webfoot's CEO just happened to be in the right place at the right time when Atari Infogrames nabbed the license to publish Dragon Ball Z games outside of Japan after the series had started to blow up in the West. Before that, only GT Final Bout had made its way over. Also, quick sidebar, with Atari in charge, that meant my beloved DBZ bid for power, the reason I bought Quake 3, was cruelly snatched away. Anyway, Webfoot wasn't exactly a bleeding edge studio, mostly focusing on low-key releases on DOS throughout the 90s, which made them perfect for Atari, who are always looking to make games on the cheap. And make games on the cheap they did! Webfoot started by working on the Legacy of Goku series, which took a little bit to find its footing, but it wasn't long before that when Atari needed more DBZ. The appeal of the show was always in the fighting and Android 18, so when the Budokai games started selling gangbusters on consoles, Atari put Webfoot to work on a fighter, one that was made under incredible duress, as they already had Legacy of Goku 2 on their plate, meaning they had to deliver both an RPG and a fighter within 6 months of each other. Webfoot made the first Legacy of Goku with a very small staff, so they hired up significantly to get its sequel out the door, but another small crew were tasked with Taiketsu, and what's more, for many on the team, it was their very first fighting game. I spoke to Gerry Swanson, the background designer on Taiketsu, who was willing to share some war stories on how this all came to be. So Taiketsu was started while LOG2 was in production. I believe a team in Michigan was developing it. A couple of people on the Legacy of Goku 2 team wrote up a design document, but the plan was that this team in Michigan was going to make the game while we were finishing up LOG2. However, once LOG2 wrapped up, the team moved over to finish Taiketsu. In addition to Legacy of Goku 2 and Taiketsu, we were also working on a game called Saiyan Smash when we could. Honestly, when you work in licensed video games in the 2000s, everything is always rushed. The fact that we managed to improve LOG2 so much over the original was because we desperately wanted to make a good game, but we didn't have enough time. We never did. Everything was rushed. As for the sprites, they were basically done in a Donkey Kong Country style. We had 3D models that were intended for the PS2, and I think they just took those 3D models and rendered them out. I think there was a little bit of processing to make the details stand out more, but I don't think we really had a lot of time to do any touch-up work over the renders. There was really no time for quality control or the many graphical changes we wanted to make. After we finished Taiketsu, we called it That Which Shall Not Be Named. No one wanted to talk about it. We all just wanted to put it behind us. Thanks, Gerry. So, Webfoot had a 3D console game called Saiyan Smash in development that played a lot like Power Stone, but was cancelled for various reasons. Since they had a bunch of 3D models already made for it, to save time, they were used as the basis for the sprites here. That certainly does explain some stuff, the less than ideal circumstances of Taiketsu's creation, but I still gotta see how it stacks up. And I think a good place to start would be with the... So, even though we know the reason why the sprites look like this, that doesn't change the fact it's still one of the ugliest things ever created by humans.
I'm ugly and I'm proud.
Good! Say it louder.
I'm ugly and I'm proud.
Louder.
I'm ugly and I'm proud!
I mean, just look at it. There's not much to say. While some of the characters look okay, like Goku, who was included in the latest build of MK New Era. Check out my gameplay channel, Flophouse Plays, link in the description below. All of them are an affront to the eyes. Especially Trunks, but especially Vegeta. No, can't. I don't. I can't take another one of those. Jesus Christ. Anyway, there are certainly some things to say about the roster, cause it's pretty pathetic. Or is it? When you first boot up the game, you're presented with Goku, Piccolo, Gohan, Krillin, Trunks, Vegeta, Android 18, and that's it. That's 7 characters, which is pretty sad for a game released in 2003. But if you grind your ass off and play through a bunch of modes, you unlock more characters than what you even started out with. Boo, Android 16, Nappa, Raditz, Frieza, Cell, Gotenks, and Broly making his North American video game debut, no less. He was even a back-of-the-box feature. So you actually end up with a pretty decent roster once you put some time into it, but that requires you to play a lot of DBZ Taiketsu, which I honestly don't recommend. Anyway, once you do start playing some matches, you'll notice something specific about the presentation. Or lack thereof. Not a single fighter utters a single line. For having such an iconic voice cast,
don't you lecture me with your $30 haircut,
and the GBA being more than capable of speech, this is a huge letdown. No Kamehameha, special beam cannon, nothing. If you close your eyes and think about the DBZ games from the early 2000s, you can't help but hear the voices, so we gotta fix this somehow.
Burning attack! What the fuck was that? Yeah, Principal kid. Get out of my fucking timeline!
Yeah, that'll do. In addition, some things in the game are just plain wrong. Certain characters like Cell, Boo, and Broly are exclusively played in a particular form. In Cell's case, it's his imperfect guise, but his portrait is clearly the opposite. Same thing with the other two. Their alternate forms only appear briefly during select super animation, so you can't actually power up and play as Super Boo, for example. And he's on the commie-damned front cover! Then it's like, why is there a weird crunching sound whenever you finish a match and get shown the results screen? Is that Goku eating an apple? There's a lot of stuff like this all over Taiketsu. They're not major problems, mind you, they're just fucking weird. What is a problem are the endings. Just the same wall of text over a background that's always telling you about some inane thing a character does after defeating all the villains. So, like Goku's is just some passive-aggressive shit about Chi-Chi, because of course it is. And really, that wraps up the presentation. Not so hot. Even if the sprites were rendered in a traditional way, it wouldn't matter too much, because Taiketsu's biggest problems lie more in the... Before we crash into the mechanics in a Yamcha-shaped crater, let's go over the modes really quick, as it's actually something the game excels in. Taiketsu contains an arcade ladder called Tournament, a time challenge, an endurance mode, a harder endurance mode, and a training option. Not bad, although you do have to unlock the majority of them. Whenever you compete in any of these modes, you accrue points that actually have a function, unlocking things in the
Smackdown mode.
I mean Z-Store. Some of this stuff is really mundane by today's standards. I mean, who cares about a random pixelated screen grab from the show, but others are halfway decent. This is where you spend those points to unlock the additional game modes I mentioned earlier, but it's the settings where things get interesting. It contains match modifiers like a faster clock, invisible fighters, unlimited supers, and one-touch knockouts. This is actually a pretty cool feature and a decent way to extend replayability, and speaking of which, Webfoot threw in 2-player link cable support, which isn't worth anything nowadays, but good on them for including it. As for the mechanics, every fighter in Taiketsu plays the exact same. To use anything requiring ki, you have to power up by holding the shoulder buttons. Only then will you have access to your 1 standard projectile attack and your 3 supers, with each one corresponding to 1 level on the bar. Every character's default moveset and buttons function identically. The same stubby punch, the same crazy reach on their sweep, the same uppercut, etc., etc. Also, there's no distinct Street Fighter special moves at all. The only thing that makes each character unique is their supers. Now, it's bad enough there's no variety amongst the normal attacks, but the stiff animation in conjunction with the awful sprites makes everything just so bad. There's also these cookie cutter combos that everyone can perform, but I don't know why you'd bother. You can't link them into supers, and they're limited to like 4 hits. The only other mechanic is the sky battles, and I've gotta be honest here, they're fucking hilarious. And that's basically it. Now, I get it's hard to shrink down the epic battles of Dragon Ball Z so they can work on a handheld, but when you think about games like DBZ Hyperdimension on the Super Famicom, the mechanics in play here fall flat on their face. Like Yamcha! Hey, wait, where the fuck is Yamcha anyway? I mentioned the stiff animation before, and it's in the game feel where it absolutely shines. Well, not shines. What's the opposite of shines? Dulls? It feels like you're controlling a few pictures of your Z Fighter, and they just kind of swat around the screen rather than handle like a tightly designed video game thing. Inputs for supers are also really unresponsive, with a lot of the commands just being kind of strange, like they're from Primal Rage or something. Listen, I'm just going to keep this section short by saying that if I could liken the moment-to-moment feel of Taiketsu to anything else, well, that would be Human Killing Machine. Whew. Just like the first Legacy of Goku, there is a nugget of a decent game here, and while Webfoot was able to vastly improve on their action RPG series and its subsequent sequels, they didn't get that chance with Taiketsu. It was absolutely annihilated in review outlets of the day, but despite that, managed to sell over 600,000 copies, which is more of a statement about DBZ's rabid 2000s era fanbase than anything else. I think if they had been allowed to make a sequel, it would have turned out much better. I mean, it couldn't have been any worse. The roster is strong, there's plenty of replay value and unlockables, it's just the fighting game part is awful. Like, really awful. Honestly though, it kinda equals out to a mixed bag of sensu beans. Most of them are rotten, but there's a few ripe ones down at the very bottom. With that said, I think DBZ Taiketsu lands squarely in the close but not quite tier, thank God. Kasumi Ninja was getting really lonely there. And that's another contender for Criticom's crown KTFO'd. If you know of any other fighters that should be sent to the next dimension, let me know in the comments below or over on my Twitter. And I'll see you next time on the worst fighting game.